Hello. Hi, Sagar. Hello, Sagar. Yeah, it's actually 9 p.m., but I'll say, it's Friday night, right? So I'm pretty sure that most of the people are just, switch off their work. So it might take time for them. So let's just wait for 5 more minutes. Okay, and then we'll start with the session. Perfect.
The active lead of Mumbai Techie Group. I would like to welcome you all to the new Mumbai Tech Group webinar. Okay, so basically, the Mumbai Tech Group's main purpose is to connect people and share the knowledge with each other. Okay, so through these seminar webinars, we try to share the knowledge between the communities and all the peoples. And today's webinar is basically uh, going to point the major topic of React, that is forms. So the webinar is going to take by the Sagar Gavand. So Sagar, first of all, thanks for you taking this webinar. Okay, and I would like you to take over now and start with the session.
Thank you very much, Dipesh. Okay, so I think I'm on screen now. Before we start the session, let me first introduce myself to you guys. Hi, my name is Sagar. I am CTO and technical trainer at Just Compile LLP. We've been delivering outputs to our client from last 15 years to all across over the world. Uh, we are specialized in software application development, consulting, and customized trading solutions. I am also founder of that Angular Masterclass, which itself is a comprehensive training solution from people who wants to learn Angular and people with any kind of skill set. Whether you are experienced or fresher, you can definitely check out our Angular Masterclass training program, which is out there on trainings at justcompile.com. Okay, so with regards to today's session, as you guys all know, that the session is about React Forms. Forms are an essential part of any application, any web application, because through the forms only, we basically get input from users. Okay, so let me quickly share my screen. I've already created a simple React application in which we are going to be designing forms. We'll see what are common practices of building forms in React, and we'll also see what are the best practices in React to design the forms. Okay, I hope my screen is visible. Okay, so this is a very basic React application where there is a component basic form is created, and the output of that application looks something like this. Okay, so before get into the session, I just want to quickly check, is my screen visible, like the browser I'm sharing? Just say something in the chat. Okay, I get everyone. Okay, so we can start now. This is the browser where we'll be looking for the output, and this is the code base in which we'll be coding. Okay, now what exactly the form in HTML? Form in HTML is composed of just one element. I mean, there are quite a few elements, but majorly there is just one element which is an input. Whenever you want to get some input from user, you basically use that one single tag, which is the input tag. Okay, uh, so let me just write down that tag here, input. And as you can see guys, here I've added, not here, here I've added an input tag here. It basically gives me a text box where we can type. Correct. Now this is a general way of creating an input text box in HTML, and the same way we basically use in React as well. Now in order to access the value of this input box, what we generally do is we have one event which is common there across all the input elements. Now, what do I exactly mean by all the input elements? Well, basically in HTML, the input box itself is so amazing that if you want a text box for an input, you basically write just an input tag. Okay, so if you want a text box, you basically write this tag and it will give you a text box. But as you just change one attribute for that input, the text box behave a little differently. Okay, for example, this input have already a property, you guys must know this, that which is a text. Okay, if you whether you mention it or don't, it will still be there always. Okay, and the text box will look always be the same. Okay, but the magic is here on this type attribute. Okay, as you change the type of the input, as I type two input boxes there, but for the second, for the second input, I basically change the type and I make it date. Now just because I made it date, it will suddenly change its appearance, and look, the second input, it's actually literally a calendar, right? If I just can zoom out a little bit so that you can see the actual content there. Yeah, you see. So this is a normal text box, this is a calendar from where you can get date as an input from user. Isn't it amazing, right? And how many others input boxes we have in React, actually in HTML I should say. Well, you can have a date, we can have input type number. Okay, so as you make it number, you will see that you can't now type any alphabets or special characters there except for numbers. Okay, only numbers are allowed here. So this is something very special, very cool about input tag, and the same thing we basically use it in React. Okay, now the main thing is, how do you exactly access the value of this input? Okay, so those who are coming from JavaScript background, they'll say, okay, let's just put ID here, and we can access the data of the input by the old school method, which is document.getElement by id, and just access its value. But this is not the way how we should access inputs value in the React. Okay, although it may work, okay, it will work if you are using only one form, but like how React works is it works in component oriented style. Okay, so the more number of components you will create, this idea is going to be failing, because now you are just accessing only that element, which is not a good idea, and this is not the actually the correct way in React to handle the components, right? So we're not going to be attaching any ID, and we are not neither going to be doing that document.getElement by ID stuff. Okay, in React there is another way. Okay, what is another way? Well, every single input in HTML has a change attribute. Okay, on change attribute. So we'll just attach an on change event here, and you can see here, it's basically an event that can give you value of the input on each change. So what if I just log that value? Those who are coming from JavaScript background, they'll understand what exactly is happening here. On every single change, the value of the input, we are simply logging over there. Okay, so if I just inspect, let me just remove all the other input boxes, we'll just go with one. Okay, and as you guys can see, if I type anything here, constantly it is getting logged on my dev tools. Correct, whatever that I type over here is getting logged constantly. Now this is how you can read the value of the input. Now you will say, how exactly? Well, what you have to just do is, let's just create, you just need to create a state there. Okay, I'll call it as a const input set input is equals use state. Okay, now those who are not from React background, you can just consider it's just a way to declare a variable in React. It's more than actually a variable, but those who are just completely new to React thing, they can just understand it like a variable. This is a variable, and this is a function that can change this variable value. Okay, So what I'm going to be doing now, instead of just console logging the data on console on each change, I'll just call this function which basically changes this variable. So I'm calling the function and passing the whole value to the input. Okay, so what will happen, this variable is going to get changed, right? But what's the proof whether the variable is getting changed or not? Well, what we can do in React, we can display the variable value. So let's just display, I'm just adding a simple br tag there. Okay, and I'm saying value is equals the value. So in the HTML we are printing the value. So as I type there, instead of now logging the data on console, so we don't need the console anymore, you can see on every key pace I'm getting the latest value which is constantly getting printed over here, and that's how you basically read the value from the input box. Okay, now this is not just a story about input with the text attribute. This is going to be the same story for all kind of input, and that this is very nice about React and HTML, because every single HTML input element has on change attribute. Okay, so whether it is of type text, whether it is of type date, whether it is of type checkbox, whether it is of type number, range, there are so many different type of inputs available in HTML. Okay, so for every kind of input the same story is going to happen. Okay, let me show you the same thing with date. Okay, we have this input, we have this variable in which the value is going to get updated. Now if I show you the output, initially the date is nothing, but as I pick any date from the calendar, you can see the value is getting printed over here because of this printing statement. Correct? Yeah, so this is how basic binding of input is managed. You created one state variable. Okay, and on every change of that particular input you are just changing the variable value. So it's like this variable is binded to the input. That means if we change the variable value, the input should also change. Let's just test it out whether that works or not. So what I'm gonna do, I'll keep a button there and I'll say change value, and on click of the button I'll try to set a new value for the input, but you will see that it is not working. See, new value is getting printed here, but it is not getting printed here. You may be thinking that this is because of date picker, but it is actually not. Even if the type of the text box is text, see, when I type anything in text box, it's getting changed in the variable. Okay, because this is the variable, right, which is getting printed over here. That's a variable. So when we change the text box, the variable is getting changed, but when we change the variable, only the variable gets changed, not the text box. And this is because it is not actually properly binded. Okay, what do I mean by properly binded? See, currently it is just a partial binding, meaning that when input changes the variable changes, but when variable changes input doesn't change. The reason is because of the value property of the input. Okay, so when you attach this input with the same property, same state is attached as a value property here for the input, this will work. Okay, now we can say it is properly binded, or in other words, two-way binded. So when you do change in the input, it gets changed here, and whenever you change this variable explicitly, that also gets changed here. So this is how you basically create one input box in React. That's cool, right? This looks cool. So if we want one more input, what should we do? Well, you guessed it right. We have to create one more variable and one more input. Okay. So in the output screen where you can see just a one text box, let's say in our form we want one more input box, all we have to just do is just create an input tag. Now we are constantly printing the value over here. This is not a mandatory stuff. You just need to remember that the variable is keep getting updating all the time. So at no matter at what time you are trying to access the value, you are going to be getting the latest value of the input all the time. So you can just simply rely on this input box, okay, from now onwards, and you can just simply forget, just in case you wanna show the value in the output, you will be adding it. Otherwise you just don't wanna display that value. So what I was saying, if you want one more type of input in the form, what you will do, you will add one more input. Let's just add one input type, can be any of these types. Let's just go with a range. Okay, but as I said, it's not gonna change. Okay, I'll make it with minimum 0 and with maximum 100. Okay, and as I just do add such input, in the output we'll get a slider. Now this is not React thing, this is simple thing from HTML. This is how you basically create a slider, and as you are sliding this, you are basically getting each value. Okay, but what I want to mention over here, that no matter whether it is of type text, whether it is type of number, whether it is type of date, range, anything, you're basically getting on change for every kind of such input. Okay, now let me add on change over here. Now why I'll be adding it? Just because we want another variable. Okay, so as I said before, if there is one input there will be one state, and if there is another input there will be another state. So let's just do create another state. This is the input 1, this is going to be input 2, and for this input we will attach value is equals input 2, and for the other input we'll be adding on change is equals to set input 2 with e dot target dot value, not validation, the value. Okay, so like this, by doing this we have binded these two input, these two states to these inputs. Okay, if you want to see them on the submit, we can do that. All we have to just do, I'm just going with the barely nice looking the UI. I'm not just focusing on the UI right now. Okay, so we are going to be attaching this function over here. So whenever there is a click, we are calling handle submit, and in the handle submit we will just display the value of both the variable input and input 2. Okay, so as I said, this is going to be the same story for other kind of input as well. Wherever I am here in the slider, the value will get logged, and the current value is 75, it seems. Correct? Yeah, but this doesn't look that nicer, because what it's leading, it leading us to, creating multiple inputs over here. Is it good? Is it bad? Well, it's not that bad, I'll say. It's just going to be a little hard to manage. Is there any other nicer way of doing the same thing? Well, definitely there is. Okay, we can just take a take this on next level, and we can just do some small changes, and we can just minimize the code. What I'm saying is, see, if there are two inputs, there are going to be two states. But that means if there are four inputs, there will be four states. If there are 10 inputs, that means there are going to be 10 states. If there are 15 inputs, that means there are going to be 15 states. Is it bad? Well, definitely not that bad, but it is not good also. Okay, so what we can do is, we'll think in a little different manner, and instead of creating one state for each input, we are going to be creating a complete object as a state. So instead of input as a state, what I am thinking, see, the problem is going to be in future that if there are going to be 10 inputs, there are going to be 10 states like this. So number of states in the component are going to be increased in future. So to just remove this problem, we'll go and just create, we'll just changing the variable. Okay, the name change was not that compulsory, but just to make sense that it is going to be holding the entire form, I'm just holding the form there, and set form is there. So user use state with an object, and username is going to be an empty, and let's say there is an email, there is first name, last name, like this. Correct. So what I'm thinking is, instead of having multiple states for each input, I'm just thinking of one single state, and this state is basically just the same state which is going to be having all the data all the time in it. So what we'll do, on this input we'll just alter this variable, on this input we are altering the same input, on any another input change we are basically going to be altering the same variable, this the same form variable. Okay, how to do that? Well, instead of attaching input, I'll attach form dot first name here. For the another input, it's going to be form dot last name there. Okay, and in case there is another input, we'll attach form dot away. Okay, like this. Now whenever each control is getting changed, okay, instead of having the, okay, let's just go with this approach first. What we'll do, we'll call the set form, but as you guys know, set form is not storing just a string in it, it is storing an object. So instead of doing that, what I'm going to do is, I'll just go like an object only. I'll just say that, okay, set a new form variable value, but get all the previous value of the form. This is a spread operator from JavaScript that allows you to spread all the properties of the object. So spread the old form, and let's add e dot target dot value, but where, as first name. So first name is going to be e dot target dot value. So we are setting a new form. See, this is how it is going to be looking like. This is the new object we are forming over here, like this. New object is getting formed with all the previous values of form because of the spread, and first name is going to be overwritten by the new value of event dot target dot value. The same thing I'm just attaching here just to reduce the line of code. And exactly the same thing we are going to be doing for the other two, but while we are setting, it's not the first name, it is going to be last name, it is going to be the hobby. And I think it's going to be almost the same, but instead of now creating the whole object, we already have the object all the time with us. So what can we do? Oh, it is a range. How funny. It should be text, right? So this is name, this is the range, which is funny because it's a range, and it's the title says last name. Again, it should be text, no minimum maximum needed over here. Okay, but as you guys know, we could have, just went with the range control also if needed. So submit, and when you submit, you see here it's a whole object that we are getting. So whenever you are changing here, whatever the value you are changing, it is constantly getting logged in the object. This is what is happening right now. Now this looks good, but this code over here is quite bulky. Can we minimize this? Yes, definitely. Okay. What we can do, instead of having different on change variations of each input, we can have one common function handle input change, which will accept an event, and we can basically just bind that here. Now the thing is, how are we even going to be getting the name of this input key in the object? Because see, what's the problem right now? Just because we thought that let's just make it common, we created a common function. So our idea is, no matter what kind of input it is, we are going to be attaching the same function, and it will take care of to which input it is assigned, and based on that it will change the key. So basically we want to call set form over here and form another form object over here. The same story gonna happen here, but the problem is, how are we going how basically we'll understand whether this input got changed, whether this input got changed, or whether this input got changed in this function. One approach is, let's pass the key name here. Okay, like handle input change for username, like this, or sorry, the first name, and based on that we can do. But actually I have another solution, because every event knows about the input. What we can do is, we can have an extra attribute over here, which needs to be same as this. Okay, so we are basically attaching a name over here. So my idea is, because every event knows about each and every single detail about that element by which the event occurred, I am just attaching an extra attribute over here. So when we get the event object, in that event we have everything. That means we have event dot target dot, not just value, but event dot target dot name as well. And what I'm doing here is, I'm trying to create a new field, event dot target dot name equals event dot target dot value. Okay, it should be colon. We are in JavaScript, right? So what gonna happen, whatever the name which is here on this input is gonna go with the event object. So in the new object we are creating for the form value, we are adding a new key over here with this value, and this is so amazing. The code is gonna work exactly the same as it was working before, but now even if we try to add few more, right, fields here, or I should say reacting, right, this is gonna work, this is gonna works in the same manner, correct? What's the benefit we have? Well, now no matter how many number of more inputs we will add, all we have to do here is just add an extra input and attach the same onChange function. Just make an extra field over here. Let's go with email. Okay, now whatever that is added here as a key, you just need to make sure that the same variable name is there for the input. So what will happen, the same handle change input will go here, handle input change, and in the target we are getting the entire input object so that we can get the name field and we can add the key in it. Okay, this is how we can make it reusable, you can say. Now what is missing in the form as per the practical use cases? Validations, right? So how do you validate? Well, in React, whatever you have in the state gets constantly display here in the UI. Okay, but for that it has to be some like what can change the UI. Okay, like for example, you can't just have a simple variable. Okay, it has to be either state or coming from Redux. So basically, uh, if you have a state, it gets printed in the UI. So for validation also, we can just simply get the same variable and do add the necessary logic is here. For example, if you want to make the input, this input as a required field, okay, so what we can do is, even what you can do, here you can take this thing in your advantage, and you can now work on validation also. You can say if first name is there, then let's not show anything, but if it's not, otherwise you can show some message. So this means if you type something, you're not getting anything, but if you don't type anything, you're getting the required validation. And this is because this message we are printing over here conditionally. Now this is a conditional rendering in React, which is a very basic thing in React. We can take a conditional rendering in our advantage and can log the validation message. But this is just for simple validation like required and so. If there are multiple validation, things might be again bulky in the UI side. So what you can do to make it much better, we can have an extra state over here. Let's call it as an errors, set errors, and use state, and for the first name, is there any, if there is any error, will it will be here. For the last name, if there is any error, it will be here. For hobby, if there is any error, it will be here. And for email, if there is any error, it will be here. So we are saying these many errors are here. Okay, in this object. Now in React itself, there is a hook called use effect that basically is a triggering mechanism. If you want to execute any of your code, whenever anything changes as a side effect of a change, you can use effect hook. So this use effect hook which I have wrote here is it's basically a side effect of this form. Whenever form variable will change, this logic will get executed. So what I'm going to be doing now is, whenever form changes, we can have all the business logic here, like if form dot use first name, if it doesn't exist, let's set the errors. Okay, it's empty, okay, in the beginning. But if the first name doesn't exist, let me create new errors object. New errors are empty. But if first name is doesn't exist, I'm just adding something in the first name. Okay, and so on. I can and so we can adjust all other if as well, and we can actually make it much organized, delegating the task of validation to another function. But I'm just right now making it simple. Okay, so basically the idea is, we have one state to hold the data of the form and another state object that will hold all the errors in the forms. Okay, so whenever the value of the form is getting changed, we are calculating all possible validations and creating errors object, and at the end we'll set the new errors object. Okay, like this. So that means not just the form, but errors object is also constantly getting updated. Okay, can we check it out? Definitely. But this time, instead of having any logic here in the UI, we are simply having errors dot first name. So if there is any error present, it will get logged in the UI. So the required is present because there is actually an error. As soon as I start typing, there is nothing. Correct? As I remove it, there is an error. But as soon as I remove, it's nothing. Okay, and if I just do this before the required, it will be not breaking the UI also. So as I type, nothing. But as I remove everything, it says required. Correct? Now you may be thinking, okay, this is really nice. Okay, but this is not again the best approach of creating React form. This is very manual way of creating forms in React, but you can definitely try this way out. Okay, if you want to build everything from scratch in your project. But if you are trying to use React for your project, I'll not say go with such approach. If you go with this approach of creating form, it comes with its own drawback. Okay, let me first tell you, this is very commonly used way of creating forms in React. Okay, this is not kind of a worst idea, I'll say, but it comes with a problem, and the problem is, because we store the entire form data in a state, there is re-rendering problem. Because in React, whenever a state changes, component gets re-rendered. Now is it really bothering you? Do you really need to be very concerned about this problem? Well, the answer is yes and no at the same time. Okay. Why I'm saying so? Because see, definitely whenever any input changes, state changes, and because of the state change, the form gets, the entire UI gets re-rendered. But it is actually not that big problem in React. The reason is how React handles every state change. Okay, we know that on every state change React actually re-renders everything, but it is not the re-render how you might be thinking of. Okay, when anything changes in React, it actually updates the virtual DOM. You can say it's an intermediate thing between you and the final DOM. Okay, so React knows what was the previous UI, and on every single state change it knows the next UI. So React actually only makes changes in the actual DOM when needed. It is already optimized so much. So when it comes to re-rendering and stuff like that, you should actually not always be concerned with this re-rendering stuff, because no matter whether it gets re-rendered for 1,000 times, okay, it's not a really big problem in React, because how React handles state changes there. Because of virtual DOM, it is actually really fast in terms of performance. Okay, but when should you actually get concerned? If in re-render there are components which takes time to load. Okay, that's why I said the answer is yes or no. Should you be concerned with re-rendering? The answer is yes or no. Because if the component itself is taking huge time, then you should be concerning. Otherwise it's not a really big deal, to be honest. Okay, though if you want to, just properly manage the re-rendering, you can use React's use memo hook in order to stop the re-rendering. Okay, the problem here is, I'll just mention the problem again. The problem is whenever every single input changes, the entire UI gets re-rendered. Okay, but as I said before, React actually does take care of all these such things. Okay, and it actually doesn't re-render everything. Okay, so problem will be just beside this entire form, if there is anything another, any other component does exist here. Okay, let's say, let me actually create another component. Okay, like this. And what I'll do, I'll just add a simple console log over here to just see whether when this component gets re-rendered. Okay, now I'll just load this same input here. Did I just made, where is this? Yeah, so this is just another component which is there. And do you guys see, it's just already rendered 4 times. And it's not just that, whenever I type any single, you know this alphabet here, on every single keystroke it is actually getting rendered. See, as I type anything, it's just rendered. If I type anything extra, it just rendered. If I type anything extra, it's just rendering again and again. Correct? Now this is a big problem. Why it is re-rendering for so many of time? The reason is because, first of all, there are two states over here. Okay, and application is already in strict mode. Strict mode by default renders everything twice. So if I just remove strict mode, we will see that it is rendering 2 times. Okay, on every keystroke, let me hit something H, and it rendered 2 more times. If I hit anything, it renders a few more times, right? So that is because of strict mode. We can discuss strict mode sometime later. It is not the topic right now. And the next reason why it is even rendering for 2 times, because there are two states over here. Where is our form? There are two states over here. One is the form, another is errors, right? So, and every single form change, we are updating errors also. So because of these two extra changes, we are having two type rendering of that in another component. Again, I'm mentioning that it is not really bad, okay, because this component is just nothing. Okay, if the component you are loading, okay, beside your form, it's not that complicated, you should not actually bother about this thing. But even if you just wanna, stop the re-rendering, you can use memo hook, and you can use it like this: const, or you have to just put the component in the memo at variable, and let's not pass any dependency over there, as it is not never gonna change. Okay, and just render the component over there. So it's just the same thing. Okay, you are calling the function, you are storing the component in the variable, and you are just displaying the variable. And now if you see the component is not getting re-rendering, it's just getting rendering for the very first time, that is only once. Next time, then after it is not getting re-render, right? So this is what it for today's session. If you want to explore another kind of input boxes, you can explore HTML's input controls. Like if you want to create a checkbox, you can just do add here input type checkbox. If you want to add drop down list, there is a select box which also works same. Like, okay, if you just want to make hobby as a select a drop down box, it's not going to be that different. Okay, let me actually add one more input, but this is going to be a a drop down list. Okay, the initial value is nothing, and this input is going to be, as I said, city. I have to use the same name there. Value is going to be form dot city. Form has the city. Form has city. Okay, errors will add it there also. But instead of calling it input, it will be select, and a select should start and select should end. Type we don't want. Option is going to be each and every option in the city. So I'll go with Mumbai. Oops. Okay, now as this is a select box, it will display a select box there in the UI. And you know what, here also when you submit, it will give you proper thing. See Delhi, now it's going to be Mumbai. So the thing is, with this approach you can create forms. But you know what, this is again not the best way, as I said. Because why? Because there are so much manual things out here. Okay, and if you don't want to do these many manual things, okay, you can definitely check out any library in React. But as we're already at the end of the session, maybe the library we can see in the next session. There are two very popular libraries. One is React Hook Form and another is Formic, and there are a few more as well. Okay, these are two um, very popular ones, and personally I like React hook form very much. Okay, so that was pretty much of it. I hope you enjoyed and liked the session. um, so I think we should drop off here, right, Dipesh? Before we sign off, I just want to remind you guys that we have started this community activity, and we have also our training program which is related to Angular. So those who want to learn Angular, you can definitely enroll in our training program. It is 1 month complete training program for Angular developers. Okay, so that was it for today's session, guys. Bye bye. See you later.